Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the briefing room. My name is Eric Cavanaugh. I will be your moderator for today's event, in which we're going to cover the spectrum that we have here in this world of business intelligence and analytics. We're going to be talking about the end-to-end process of analytics. Very pleased to have some all-star guests with us today. Let me go ahead and start moving through the slides. So there is yours truly, and enough about me. The mission, as many of you now know here in the briefing room, is to reveal the essential characteristics of enterprise technology. So what we do is we pair up analysts, independent analysts typically, with vendors who are doing some interesting things. And the idea is that they do not coordinate before the show. And the reason they don't coordinate is because we want to have a very natural, organic dialogue between the analyst and the vendor. In doing so, what we get are very good questions that result in some very revealing and informative answers, and that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish here. So unlike other events, the analyst does not go first, and in fact I do the value proposition stuff up front. I then hand it over to the vendor. They go for about 20 minutes giving a technical presentation of what they have built, what it is, why they designed it a certain way, and what benefits they get from that particular design. The analyst then gives a brief response. The analyst has a week to review their slides, and then they give a brief response, and after that they just start asking questions. So at the end, there's a 10-minute space where you get to ask questions as well. So I encourage you to send your questions in at any time. You help make these events very, very informative and very valuable. We'll get a lot of great questions from our audience. You can also tweet your questions with a hashtag of BriefR. You can see that in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, so feel free to tweet away. So we cover a different topic every month, and the idea there is we are really trying to make sure that you as an end user get as many apples-to-apples comparisons as you can within a particular time period. So June is intelligence. Of course, we're talking about business intelligence, but there are other forms of intelligence as well, process intelligence, for example. And today we're really going to be talking about a synthesis of all that stuff. So the official title is The Whole Picture, How to Achieve Business Agility with Analytics. And we're going to be talking to a company called Birst. The folks over at Birst have been around the industry for a while, so they learned some lessons other places and put that to use in their own offering, which is a software as a service offering. And we're going to learn what makes that special and what makes it different from other kinds of offerings up in the cloud. So business intelligence technologies typically are focused on that highly structured data, transactional data, customer data, things of this nature to help companies understand where they're making profit, where they're not making profit, how they can realign their business, how they can strategize, let's face it, how they can become agile. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is the value of managing this whole end-to-end process, because a lot of times what happens is you'll have a whole variety of different tools in the technology stack. You'll have tools, for example, that pull data out of source systems, like ETL tools, for example, extract, transform, load. Some companies, of course, use things like data federation or data virtualization to get the data there. You'll have modeling tools, for example, to help you model the data as it serves the organization best for reporting and analytical purposes and so forth. You'll have dashboard tools, data visualization tools, and obviously one of the challenges of having a lot of different products is that you have a lot of integration work to do. And of course, one thing we've seen in the last few years is where the big, powerful vendors in this space, IBM, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, what do? Well, they go out and they buy lots of other vendors. They buy lots of other tools. Now, sometimes the integration process works very well, very swiftly. Sometimes it doesn't. There are, of course, many horror stories of companies that get bought and just kind of disappear, and that usually makes end users rather unhappy. But another topic we've been talking about on this show and on some of the other shows that we do is this impact of the cloud and of cloud computing and how the cloud is changing the way application architectures are designed. And it's also raising expectations for what people expect to get when they use these different kinds of tools. So we've got our work cut out for us today, and I'm happy to report that we have our very own Robyn Bloor, our Chief Analyst, online today as the analyst. So Birst, end-to-end business intelligence. It's embedded, multi-tenant software as a service platform. We're going to learn about what they're doing over there. They're based out of San Francisco. Brad Peters, you can see him there. He's the CEO and co-founder. He spent the last 10 years building analytics products and solutions. You can see he's got a bit of a history in the business as well, so he has seen how other folks do it, and I'm sure he learned a thing or two in that process. So now I'm going to switch decks here, and I'm going to hand the keys over to Brad Peters. And folks, I will post a link to the slides so you can browse them at your leisure. And with that, Brad, I'm going to hand it over to you. Just click on that slide anywhere and use the down arrow on your keyboard to move through the slides.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, you sound good.
Awesome, great. So I appreciate it, and it was a fantastic introduction in terms of just setting the context for who Birst is and where we sit. Birst is a newer vendor in the space. It's a space that's been around for a long time. So what I'm hoping to do here is pretty quickly go through an overview of who Birst is and what we do. Obviously, there's a lot of technology that we could talk about. We could spend hours going through demos and technical architectures. I think the idea is to walk away with a few high-level points. So hopefully we'll get those across and get folks to understand what it is we do that's different. Birst today, we've got well over 1,000 organizations that are relying on Birst across a whole bunch of different verticals. We are a horizontal business intelligence platform, and so we tend to see customers across a variety of different segments and functions. We're about 65% direct, 35% OEM, which means there are a whole host of other software as a service and cloud providers that are using Birst as their embedded BI and analytics solution. It's a very, very complex product family, so no one really wants to build it themselves, understandably. But also the two of those feed off nicely together because there's a fair bit of engineering work in some of these high-performance OEM relationships that comes back to the benefit of our direct customers as well. We deal with big, small, departmental, enterprise, you name it. We see a cross-section of the enterprise. We are an enterprise BI platform, and that means everything from raw data into produced information out the back end. I've lived in BI for a very long time. And the biggest challenge with BI is most organizations sell BI as a list of features. And as Apple would point out, that a list of components is not the same thing as a well-engineered product. Our view on BI is that BI historically has been acquired or even just developed as a series of independent features, which look great on analyst slides with checkboxes, but tell you nothing about how those features operate as a seamless whole. Birst's whole mission in life, in my experience at Siebel, which is now Oracle BI, was that the features on the PowerPoint slide belie the complexity that is BI. There's a whole information factory that needs to be built every time someone needs a new BI deployment, and that involves taking data from a variety of different structured sources and a variety of packaged applications and the like, and also data from homegrown systems, and building information systems. Taking that raw data in, which was designed for the internal use by a packaged application or a homegrown application, and turning it into useful information that a normal, mere mortal business person can use to make a decision. And that's a big process. It's a process that's below the waterline. It's unsexy. It's not terribly glamorous, but it's the part that's the most important. It's also the part where the enterprise suites have traditionally fallen over because they don't really deal with the chain in an integrated way. At Birst, we've sought to encapsulate that and use cloud technologies to make that whole process more seamless. And the customers that we deal with typically take data from at least 2, maybe sometimes as many as 15 or 20 different packaged applications or homegrown sources. Many of the popular ones are the ones that are listed here on the slide. I would say SAP is probably our largest packaged application that we work with, but we work with a whole bunch of other ones. Oracle, Siebel, Epicor, Marketo, even guys like SalesLogix and obviously Salesforce.com as well. The reality in the marketplace is, as Eric mentioned earlier, that most of the big companies have acquired their way to a product suite, and that product suite is a list of features and sets of capabilities. But just as you don't want to go to an Apple store and buy a bunch of individual microcomputer chips and boards and buy a soldering iron yourself, you want to buy the Mac or the iPhone and have it as an integrated unit. We're not at that state right now in the industry, and in fact, most people don't even think about BI that way. They think about it as a list of features. And the challenge, therefore, is that most of the effort that goes into launching a BI solution is not actually the software cost itself. 80% typically of the cost of a BI implementation is actually the human capital involved in producing one of those information factories. And any solution which doesn't address the human capital portion doesn't really address the efficiency issues around integrating these solutions. In fact, having 5 more features that double the time to implement, I would argue, puts BI further out of reach for the average business professional. There are many analyst firms that quote various statistics that suggest that the majority of business decisions that are made in organizations are not made with the benefit of BI. And the reason is it's just too expensive and too cumbersome to leverage this architecture that requires ETL tools, databases, data warehouses, OLAP tools, cubes, reporting frameworks, in-memory tools, reporting tools, mobile tools, banded report writers, all of those components, data modeling tools, all to be seamlessly pulled together to create a single deployment. It requires different skill sets, different training, typically teams of folks to pull together, and that just means that the minimum size of a BI project is going to be pretty high. So there's sort of this gap between Excel and what the BI products that are out there that deliver today. And that's really what Birst is designed to address, because we actually don't believe that the BI suite vendors had the wrong vision. We actually believe that Business Objects and Cognos and those guys, the feature sets and the vision of where they were trying to go made a lot of sense. Just the execution of the way they built their companies and products meant that you essentially have libraries of code as opposed to integrated applications. On the other end of the spectrum, though, because it's been so painful, there have been some vendors that have been trying to fill that gap, and we've seen a number of folks fill a category that would otherwise be referred to as discovery tools or visualization tools. And those are products where the aim of the product is vastly more modest. Let me take a simple data set of a few tables or more, but relatively few, load them into a tool, typically in memory, and create a presentation that business users can interact with. And that's fine for small data sets. But it doesn't handle the data infrastructure needs. It doesn't handle the ETL, the underlying data complexities that are there. It doesn't handle the operational reporting. It doesn't handle the enterprise infrastructure that's around a repeated data load framework. So every day you get new data feeds, and those data feeds cause data to change and all that sort of stuff. That's the messiness of BI. They really weren't designed to deal with that. They were really more designed to sidestep it. And some analyst firms are actually considering separating their research reports into 2 different groups because the product sets are so different. Birst's approach was really different, which is to say, look, the BI guys, the BI suite vendors had the umbrella set of functionality correct, and they had the vision right for what people should be able to do. They just assembled it as a series of point products without any integration. They integrated on the price list, but the products themselves are separate. And so wouldn't it be great if you could use an encapsulating technology, put a layer of automation above those tool sets, and really pre-integrate those packages, create a single tool set and a single framework that ties them all together and essentially makes a BI framework behave like it's a discovery tool. And that was really the vision behind Birst, which was we need those components. You need data modeling, you need ETL, you need some element of change data capture and data management and those sorts of things to have a real production BI instance where you're producing information on a repeated basis. However, it shouldn't be as painful as the process is with the disintegrated suites that you see that are out there. So if we can use cloud technologies, which are designed to be encapsulations, take those different products, build an integrated single product that has those capabilities in it, we can deliver a much more responsive, much more capable solution that's out there. So can we create a BI platform that behaves like a discovery tool? And really the cloud is the way to do that. The reason for that is the cloud is a way of taking lots of complicated subcomponents and hiding them under the covers while encapsulating them in a single virtual application instance. Think of Google, for example. Unbelievable technology behind the scenes, lots of server processes doing amazing amounts of data processing, but you interact with it through a text box. They've thought through not just the pre-integration of the different components, they've thought through how it's actually used and the deployment and the integration. The Google engineers own the complete experience of the product. So at Birst, what we like to say is we don't sell a list of features, we sell an experience. We sell the integrated set of capabilities. And that's really why our customers choose us. We've taken the set of features that you would otherwise find in an enterprise class solution. We've made it multi-tenant, so you don't have to set up 15 instances if you have 15 different data sets. One instance will do. And we've integrated the various components, data management, data mart building, data warehouse building, modeling, data flow, as well as dashboarding, scorecarding, visualization, and operational reporting. By doing that, we remove all the redundancies between the different layers that are unnecessary. We significantly simplify the process of deploying one of these solutions, and we allow the designers to focus on the high value-added problems in BI. We can't make that stuff go away. We can't remove the business complexity, but we can make it a lot easier to implement the business complexity by automating it and removing some of the rote plumbing that's required in this business. So folks buy us because we deliver that solution in a single box. It's unique in the way we've done it. We're not doing BI light. We're doing BI, but in a box, and that's a different experience. So it's really all the layers that you would expect, from data management to business modeling to building a business model and semantic layer, all the goodness of the different elements that we've learned through the years and the benefits of the OLAP, ROLAP wars, plus the user experiences through dashboards, discovery, reporting, and mobile, as well as the ability to live query existing data sources. So it's not another form of a cube. It's not an in-memory structure per se. We do support that as well, but we can actually query existing sources, and we are compatible with existing infrastructures, which also makes us unique in a cloud environment. That if you have a database with data in it, we speak SQL or we speak MDX, and we can connect to those sources and treat them as if they're first-tier members of our environment. Again, we're not trying to replace existing ecosystems. We're just trying to make sure that data goes from one end of the chain to the other as smoothly as possible. You're only as good as your weakest link, and by focusing on one or the other, you oftentimes miss different elements in the hierarchy. I do want to point out that we're not religious about where data is hosted. Our value add is not in the fact that we host bits. In fact, that's a commodity. There are vendors out there who are claiming that they're SaaS or cloud vendors because they simply host their on-prem platform. That's not the approach we took. Actually, in the history of SaaS solutions, just hosting an on-prem platform has never worked. When I was at Siebel, we hosted Siebel, and candidly, it was just as painful for us to host as it was for our customers. And our customers demanded higher SLAs for us, and our costs were actually higher than when our customers implemented on-prem. So historically, the ASP model doesn't work. With Birst, we engineered the solution from the ground up to be a software as a service model where we engineered in the deployment as a fully hosted SaaS model, not a hosted on-prem model, but a SaaS solution designed for automated delivery of the process. And in the process of doing that, we automated the way BI was delivered. And we said, you know what, just because we do that way in the cloud doesn't mean we can't do that on-premise as well. So just because software's on-prem doesn't mean it has to stink. All the good things that we learned about automating the deployment of BI in the cloud apply equally as well on-prem. So let's offer this solution as an appliance as well, so that people who want to run their BI near to where their existing data is, for whatever reason, for security, for control, for management, for IP ownership, whatever the reasons might be, they want to have on-premise solutions where their data is, that's fine. But it doesn't mean that they don't also benefit from a multi-tenant SaaS BI instance with automated BI deployment. So let's create an appliance, and let's let people choose where they want it. So we really don't care. We offer the solution either way. It's priced the same. We're agnostic as to where it goes. We can let you move back and forth between one and the other. The point is, can we make the process of delivering BI significantly easier than it had been, and not a some assembly required or lots of assembly required process as is typically the case. We want our customers to be up and running with BI and being able to deploy multiple iterations of that solution very, very easily. It's not magic. It's not. We're not saying that BI is easy. We do believe that anybody who pitches that is lying to you. This stuff is inherently hard. But if we can provide an automation layer to allow you to focus on the hard bits without having to be stuck with all the ugly stuff, then we can get a lot more productivity out of your BI deployments, and you can iterate on them more quickly as well. So you don't have as much of a likelihood to have one of the other problems of BI, which is I build it once, but then I can never change it because it's too expensive to deal with. So as a result, the whole Agile process is get it up quickly and then iterate on it fast, and Birst was designed for that purpose. So with that, like anything else, we deal with customers that span a huge range of applications and data volumes. We're not here to say that everything's in memory or everything's on disk or everything's A or B or C or D. Our experience has been that our customers span 7 to 8 different orders of magnitude of data volume, and anywhere from 5 tables to 500 tables. So that degree of data volume expanse and complexity means one size probably doesn't fit all. And so with Birst, fundamentally what we care about is that we're automating a solution which at its core is sitting in a database. Your data is sitting in a relational database that is compatible with all the existing relational standards that are out there. And on the low end, that database is an economical database that is extremely affordable and extremely manageable in a multi-tenant environment. In mid-range data volumes, that database sits in memory, so it's extremely fast, as fast as the in-memory tools that you'd expect. And at the high end, it's MPP, massively parallel and columnar, so that it can go and scale up to the many, many terabytes. And at the extreme end, it supports unstructured data and the Hadoop infrastructure for extremely large data volumes. So really what we work with our customers is to understand where they are now, where they're going to be in 2, 3, 5 years, and we come up with an architecture that allows folks to match what their needs are to the underlying data infrastructures. I have yet to see the holy grail for a data store for BI. I know a lot of vendors pitch it. If you find one, please let me know. We haven't seen it. We've tried dozens of them. But our goal is to really support a spectrum of them so you get the best of breed of all those different characteristics. With Birst, as the slide I showed you before in the architecture, you can load data in, we can map to existing sources, and we can transform them into effectively a series of star schema and data warehouses in our environment. And then when we're done with that, we have a data model and a logical data model that can present various different styles of user interface to the end users, because ultimately it's end users that want to get value out of it. So with Birst, we have visualization capabilities where the goal is for the end user themselves to explore the data and be able to view data multidimensionally beyond just charts and graphs and tables, but more sophisticated things like trellises and maps and stuff like that. We have dashboards, which is a different environment, which is more around interactivity and parameterized experiences, so people can start with high-level views and drill down in place and see and test various hypotheses in lightly structured views where people can where somebody has set up something ahead of time that makes some sense and gives a set of guardrails for people to explore within, and then ultimately manage within that. We supply reporting, which is more the push model. Let me have an analyst pre-create a series of pre-filtered, pre-assembled data, and we'll publish that out to a large audience. All three of those modes, data visualization, discovery for yourself, dashboards, lightly structured stuff for other folks, and to reporting, which is publishing large volumes for other folks, those are all very viable models, but very different models of and highly formatted reports, those sorts of things. Those are all different models of BI. And also so is ad hoc, where I might want to pivot and slice and dice and drill and navigate and all those sorts of things. And traditionally with the with the on-prem players, there's the historical legacy players. Those are usually different products. And you develop in one, and then you have to redevelop in something else. With Birst, we've unified all of those major interaction modes on a single common metadata architecture. You can deploy, everything is printable, everything is deployable, everything is ad hocable. The idea is to create a simple interface where all 3 or 4 of those user modes are in the same product. So what I'm going to do is do something really quickly. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to give folks a very, very quick flavor for what Birst looks like. This is hardly giving it justice, but I'm going to share my desktop really quickly and show you 2 quick things. I'm going to show you what the product looks like. I'm going to log into the public Birst instance here, just so you can get a sense of, if I can remember my password, just so you can get a sense of what the product looks like. I'm logging in, and the interesting thing here in Birst, we have this notion of spaces. A space is an encapsulation of everything, the data model, ETL, data warehousing, all of the dashboards, reports, measures, metrics, metadata, all of that. Not different tools. It's a virtual encapsulation of all the different layers in one spot. And all I just simply want to show you is that what we want is something that combines the interactivity of traditional visualization products that are drillable, visually filterable, provide a variety of ways of visualizing that information, allow you to drill down, drill across, see things by maps, be able to filter in place, all those kinds of things. In the same interface as something where you might want to print content, you might want to analyze content, whatever. Here I'm looking at a specific dashboard. I'm looking at a slice of retail sales of a computer manufacturer, and being able to select various things like retail store distribution in the Southeast for mobile phones, being able to drill, open up a particular view, change how I see it, but not even change how I see it, as an end user being able to actually open up that analysis in the dashboard itself, not have to go back to IT, and be able to say I want to actually change that analysis, add new measures and metrics. Let's say I want to look at inventory and I just wanted to throw that onto analysis that I have, but be able to modify the content in place, print it out, schedule for reports, do all those kinds of things without having to go back to report designers or IT. That's the goal with Birst here. In addition to that, I wanted to quickly just show you how someone builds something with Birst and show you where the automation is. Very quickly with Birst, I'm going to start with a blank space, nothing in it at all. And there's a couple different ways to get data in. There's a visualization mode. There is a advanced business analytics mode, which is I'm going to use here. And I'm going to create a simple demo space that has no data in it at all. And in that process, what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a simple data set with 8 or 9 different tables. And I'm going to go to my desktop here, and I'm going to upload a database that's a standard demo database. And in the process, I'm going to go over to our data flow screen over here. Take a couple of these different sources. It's just an order detail database. This should just take a couple of minutes, which has orders, order line items, customer data, category data, product data. So again, it's not one table. I have, let's say, orders here where I have an order for each, or entry for each order, and I have order line items. I'm just going to join these data sets together. I'm going to just create the linkages in Birst that show me kind of how this data lines up. So for each order, there's a customer. For each order, there's an employee that sold the order. For each order line item, there's a product, and for each product, there's a category. And I can leave it at that. With Birst, I can stop with this, and I can literally go over and start building reports off of this. The challenge is what happens tomorrow when I get a new data set and I have a new list of customers, a new set of orders. I want to be able to accumulate that information. So what I'm going to show you here is not just the discovery mode version of Birst, like a ClickTech or something like that. I'm going to show you the automated warehousing capability. So in addition to starting out with a straight schema of the data that I got, I can click a button. And then on the right-hand side, what you see here is Birst has actually generated a series of star schema for me under the covers. I'm going to process that data now so that that gets loaded. And what's basically happening is Birst is taking every one of these data sources right here, and it's separating out from that source the elements which I'm going to want to measure, things that which would otherwise be facts, things I want to count, sum, average, those sorts of things, and the things that I want to aggregate by the dimensions. And the reason that's important is because over time, if I've got a customer list, for example, tomorrow I get another customer list, and some of those customer names will be repeated, some of those customer names will be new. With Birst, we automatically do the change data capture. We'll add customer names to the list when they need to be added. We'll update the ones that need to be updated, and we'll keep this unique so that every customer has one and only one entry. That allows you to create an environment that allows you to create a production data management environment where data is coming in on a regular basis and being manufactured and processed into end user data, and then loaded for end users to experience in the process. So what's happening here is that we turn that into a data mart and a data warehouse, and then when you're done, all of that data is loaded into multiple structures. And actually, if I look into it a little deeper here, each of these different columns in my data source is either tagged as a measure or a metric, or it's tagged as a hierarchy, and Birst is actually splitting that out. And each data source is tagged with a grain. And as a result of that, Birst knows the style of data that I'm getting and is able to manage these data flows on an ongoing basis. And when that happens, I can simply click over and then start doing analysis of that data. So when I click into this and take a look at this, what I end up with is a data set that has that data in a subject area. And in that subject area, I've got things like measures, metrics, those sorts of things. And I can simply drag elements of my data set onto a canvas. I can throw things together under the covers. Birst is actually creating all the queries that would go into the system, and very easily be able to pivot, slice, dice, manipulate that information, visually filter, navigate, all that sort of stuff. So it's very easy for folks to very quickly throw data together into a data set, data model it, produce a repeatable data framework, and then deliver it out to end users. So with that, I'll get my presentation back here. So with that, we can find out more, but I'm going to turn this back to Robyn Bloor and those folks and see what questions they have.
All right, that sounds good. Very interesting presentation. I love that demo, and that was going pretty fast. So I think that's probably a pretty good sign. I'm sure it was prepared, but hey. Okay, let's go ahead and queue up Robyn's slides. Let's see. I think you're down here somewhere, Robyn. There you are. And I'll hand you the keys to the WebEx, and the floor is yours. Just click on that slide and use the down arrow on your keyboard.
Okay. Well, I have to say, actually, that was it was a very fast demo, and I wouldn't have minded if you came a few more minutes, to be honest, because I thought you were demonstrating. Admittedly, it's a demo, but I thought you were demonstrating something really quite sophisticated and quite a small piece of time. Anyway, I think one of the questions that one can ask about the whole area of BI is where are the benefits? In the sense that I've encountered in my travels, I've encountered a fair amount of what you would say technology that was implemented but didn't really deliver anything like it was supposed to do. And I had actually attended a presentation last week, which was kind of an interesting thing. It's a consultancy that went in, and one of the things they did was actually retire old applications. They have a special practice of retiring old applications, and they said that in one company that they'd just done some work for, they were able to retire 40% of the applications that were actually running. And they indicated that they didn't think that was unusual. And I think that actually happens in BI. I think people come in, buy a product, deploy it, and it doesn't see anything like the amount of use that would make it, that would pay for the effort and pay for the license fees. So, I would say, the first statement, BI delivers value only to the extent that it delivers business benefit. If it doesn't deliver business benefit, then it really is actually a lot of effort plus a lot of investment in hardware, software, and time in order to do something that's not used well. So what I thought I'd do, for this presentation, which kind of, it was like I went through Birst's presentation and realized that actually Birst does quite a lot, in terms of the various things that one can do in the BI environment. And I just thought that one interesting way to look at all of this is to, well, what is BI anyway? Let's start with that. And I think that there are four fundamental categories. There's what I categorized here as hindsight, which is the kind of regular reporting, operational BI stuff, the stuff that we've had around for a long time. Some of it actually is implemented in Excel, but mostly it's implemented in what I would say the traditional BI products, the business object type products, where the business needs to know on a regular basis about the status of something in informational terms. You plug this stuff in, you build it, and away you go. And it keeps on chugging out, that kind of stuff, week after week, month after month. Then there's oversight, and the idea of oversight is much more, you're not looking backwards, you're looking to what's happening right now. So I would classify dashboards, to a certain extent OLAP, business process monitoring, stuff like that. I would say that that's kind of the area of oversight. It's the area of there are people keeping an eye on what's going on. It's a kind of management function. And if any particular piece of information, some key performance indicator, it gets triggered in some way or other, then there should be an instant reaction. And the company should be able to deal with it. We then have insight, which we could also classify as discovery. But this is what I think most of the things that people get excited about in the BI space, data mining, all the statistical analysis to establish trends and relationships in amongst the data that you might not have realized that existed, that might make you change the way that you conduct business. You know, and it's a kind of an interesting thing in a way that you know, it's the insight is, let's say, the sexy part of BI, and it's sexy because it really can deliver extraordinary benefit if it's used well, and of course if it's not used well, it won't deliver anything. And then we have foresight, which is predictive analytics, and I wasn't going to say much about that simply because right now there are some very good predictive analytics products, but it's not an area where I think a lot of people have actually done anything, you know, in the sense of a lot of BI people have actually deployed much out there. There are areas where I know it's paying extremely high dividends, but I don't think it's actually that commonly implemented. But we did the information-oriented architecture last year, and I'll kind of refer to that in the last slide. But if I was doing it again in terms of what I would say the front-end tools, I would look at it in terms of hindsight, oversight, insight, and foresight. And I think it's a good way to look at things for the following reason. There are nuances. You know, it's like you can do all of this BI stuff in one way or another, but there are things that you also you know, have to be concerned about, and you actually have to get right in order for any of this to work properly. And you know, here's my list that I drew up a couple of days ago, which is basically there's data flow. You know, data doesn't just kind of magically appear in the various end user tools. It has to get there. The data flow has to be integrated. There has to be a level of automation so that it appears regularly and appears you know, at the right places for it to be used. There's the performance and timeliness of the whole infrastructure that's delivering data. And again, you know, if something doesn't arrive on time, it may be that that's just as bad as it never arriving at all. So, you know, it's a factor. In terms of data coverage, you may have a whole, you know, plethora of BI tools deployed that do absolutely everything you can do. But you know, what is the data coverage of the data the organization uses? What data sources? And you know, how much of the unstructured data sources are actually being included in BI? You know, another question, another area to kind of be concerned about. Effective representation of data. There are a lot of, you know, in the past like 10, 15 years, we've seen a lot of what I would call improvement in the way that you can actually visualize data. But, you know, the question is, you know, is the data that you are looking at through any kind of particular BI lens, is it being effectively represented for your use of it and for your own personal way that you understand things? Because some people actually can see a column of figures and get stuff from it, and other people see a column of figures and all they see is a column of figures. There's the user self-service aspect of BI. And then there's the two things that I think are just like the kind of crux of the whole BI area. First of all, has this been implemented in a way that's actionable? Because, you know, it's okay to, for one way or another, to get a reporting on data through some kind of BI tool, and you can see and know something, but actually has your organization made it possible for you actually to take action in an effective way, in a timely way, in order to address what it is that you've noticed. And then there's automated action. That's less common in BI, but it's actually the case, certainly with predictive analytics, that given that you are predicting a certain thing that can happen, you may have a high confidence in the predictive analytics, and you may want to automate action completely. And there's a question there as to, you know, are there places where automated action would be good? Finally, there's completeness. Okay. The reason that I was going through this list was that I wanted to do what I've done on the next slide. I wanted to introduce the idea of a BI audit. And this is kind of, you know, consistent with the idea that there may be a lot of inappropriate deployment, or let's say ineffective deployment of BI. And if I take those various dimensions that I just talked through, and I take the four categories of hindsight, oversight, insight, and foresight, then you could quite legitimately take an organization and you could start scoring it. You know, you could start scoring it in terms of hindsight, and you could also start scoring it in terms of those various dimensions. So what I've actually done here is just put in figures, but this is like, well, this is hindsight. This is the old reporting. How complete is it? Well, when we actually looked at it, we discovered that data flow integration was pretty much perfect. It was certainly performing because we only wanted it to be delivering end of day, end of week. And the month reports, was no pressure on that. The data coverage, yes, there was data it didn't cover, but there was most of the data that the organization should in one way or another be reporting on was there. Effective representation, was it good? Yeah, 85% of the time the people were seeing in a way that they wanted to use a self-service. Were the users able to get at the information? Were they able to kind of have some control over? Yeah, in this instance, 100%. Was it actionable manually? Yes. Actionable automatically? Not at all. But what we actually have here now is we have scored what I would regard as a dimension of BI, and we can also do the same for oversight, and we can say, what dashboards have we got deployed? Have we worked out what the key performance indicators are in the various important business processes in the organization? Have we actually fed the data to the right people and so on and so forth? And we could, we would likely, in my opinion, if you actually did score a whole organization for oversight, you would likely come to a conclusion that, there are a lot of places where it actually wasn't implemented that maybe it should be. In terms of insight as well, there's normally some important part of the organization that knows that it can do extraordinarily, it'll do very well if it is given really good discovery tools on various sets of data. But, across the organization, in my experience, insight, often there are people that actually could use the tools that don't have them. And with Foresight, I'd scored this particular example 0 because nobody was using predictive analytics. But I think, for anybody listening, I think that this is actually a reasonably good exercise to do on your own organization in order to actually work out BI in terms of what have we got, and what could we do to improve, and what are the areas where nothing is actually being done at all. Now, this brings me to the information audit architecture. This is a diagram that we created about the beginning of last year. And the idea here was to actually depict all of the parts of a BI architecture, including all the possible data sources, all the possible middleware that might be involved, from a point of view of registering what is out there, having a semantic data map, having master data management capability, implementing data quality, data governance, and so on. ETL, of course, and data integration, data virtualization. In writ large, BI is a matter of putting middleware between data management and the BI apps. And now, if I was to change the BI apps that I've listed here, I would actually change them in terms of insight, foresight, hindsight, and oversight, because I actually think that those are key differentials, and they will probably lead to distinctly different architectural decisions that you make. So this is, if you like, information-oriented architecture. In terms of Birst, you can see from the presentation, I hope, certainly I took this away, you can see that, first of all, they actually have a fairly comprehensive set of front-end tools. I know that they don't pretend to do things like complex event processing and so on and so forth, but most of the tools that you would want, they are making the middleware issue go away to a certain extent. I don't know how effective that is, but that's for us to actually discuss. And they are capable of connecting to a whole series of data sources. And are capable of doing that in a one-shot service. And I think, they Birst represented itself as being distinct from pretty much all the other BI offerings, in a sense that it's got a lot of versatility in terms of the various BI capabilities it's got, but it's also got a fairly well-plumbed architecture underneath. So, having said all that, because that's all I've got to say about, I don't know, as background for what we're about to go into, I'd like to ask the following questions. So, I mean, let's begin. Front-end BI tools often include capabilities that assist an organization in effective data flow. Birst clearly does that, but what I'd like to do is to just get into what Birst does and doesn't do in terms of data flow. I mean, I certainly get the impression that if I can point a set of sources, then Birst will attempt to manage the whole of the data flow from those sources right through to all of the front-end capabilities. So the question is that so?
Yeah, this is Brad again. Yeah, that is so. The emphasis, though, is important because a lot of with Birst, the emphasis of the data flow is to get data from whatever those raw sources are into an analytical data store, such that analysis can be performed, and also such that you have a data model that can retain history and effectively be that analytical single source of truth. We are not a data flow infrastructure a la an EIS tool or one of those a generalized ETL tool, which is for creating workflow processes to merge my Oracle with my SAP or something like that. This is purely for the purposes of taking raw, generally operational data sources, although not always, and migrate them into a single consolidated physical analytics store for the purposes of analysis and discovery.
Okay, and when you talk about capabilities over Hadoop, are you just regarding Hadoop as a data store in that sense, and therefore you could possibly federate it with one or two other things, but your interest in Hadoop is only to grab information from it and create your metadata view that will feed the various Birst tools?
It's a bit more than that. I mean, Hadoop is optimized for relatively unstructured content and content of fairly low information and economic density. The reference architecture we see continually over and over again with Hadoop is take your low information density content, load it into Hadoop, and then use Hadoop as a refining framework to refine that data down into much more structured content that can then be analyzed. Because without the structure, it's hard to, you can't provide a basis for analysis across different data points, and without that reference point, it's hard to do analysis. And we see that. I mean, that's how Google Analytics works. That's how Facebook works. That's how Zynga did its analytics. I mean, that is the reference architecture. So we view Hadoop as more than just an originating source, but also we can stick our data flow on top of Hadoop, and some of those little red boxes that I created can be Hadoop sources. And we can also use Hadoop for MapReduce operations to do a little more complex things than just query data and move data into structured content, but also to do things like extract content from textual data, or apply XSLTs to XML structures, things like that, in a distributed way, but ultimately with the goal generally of refining that data down by a factor of 50, 100, 1,000 to 1 into more structured content that fits in a relational environment where you can do more dimensional analysis.
Okay, so I mean, and this is kind of the third question I was going to ask, but your attitude to unstructured data is that you want that to have gathered structure before you pull it into your environment, and therefore Hadoop's a very good way of doing that, especially if you've got big heaps of this stuff. Is that kind of your position? You don't have any specific capabilities for dealing directly with unstructured data?
We don't do search.
Right.
We can index content. I mean, we can run MapReduce on documents and provide indexes and structures like that. But even with search, you're creating structured content. I mean, fundamentally, the lack of structure doesn't give you the basis for doing comparative and any sort of comparisons across documents, even with search indexing is required. So, which is a structuring process. So, right. What we're doing is providing a mechanism for helping you add structure to data, but not just provide structure, but also to distill it down into its essence so that you can analyze it dimensionally. And when you can analyze it dimensionally, then you can take visualization tools and things like that, and you can compare elements versus other elements, and you can see these trends and patterns. the less dimensional your data set, search is a one-dimensional process. It's not terribly analytically rich. The idea of having a multidimensional exploration for unstructured content means you need to apply multiple dimensions of structure to it at a given time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's kind of interesting. It's actually it's kind of instructive as well, and I'm glad you said those things, because I think they clarified something for me that I've been thinking about yesterday. Okay, it's the obvious cloud question, but you were the first guys to evangelize the cloud, you know. So I'm kind of interested in from one perspective, is, you know, you offer Birst in the cloud, or you allow people to have it on-premise. So what's kind of the proportion in the customer base between on-premise implementations and cloud implementations?
Right now we're seeing about 50-50. And interestingly enough, a number of folks wouldn't have considered Birst initially if we were only cloud. But now that we have an appliance and they can run it on-prem, we're being considered in a much wider variety of applications. But a good chunk of those guys, once they actually start thinking about it, and once we start saying, well, you know, hey, look, we really don't care, interestingly enough, a reasonable percentage of them say, you know what, let's just do our first deployment in the cloud because it actually is a whole lot easier. And we do see the time frame from when they intend to bring it on-prem continue to recede as they start to realize, hey, it's not that big a deal. But on the flip side, we've also seen folks that start with the cloud and do want to bring things on-prem. So you know, we see a mix, but right now it's probably half and half, I'd say.
Okay, well, I'm interested in that. You know, the people that actually start in the cloud and bring it back on-premise, what was it that made them want to bring it back on-premise? Because the only thing I can think of is security concern, and I've always regarded, you know, a really good cloud operator is probably going to be more secure than the average data center, in my opinion. But anyway, I mean, what is it that's motivating them to bring it in-house?
So security is largely a red herring these days. I think we've sort of debunked that when ADP and Salesforce and guys like that are out there. But there are some fundamental reasons why folks would want to bring it on-prem. So one is our OEM providers. They're providing data center operations for their customers. The idea of rehosting data in yet another data center contractually becomes a challenge for them. So they have, when you're creating one-off data partnerships, it's just easier to warrant your data in a single data center. So that's just a pure contractual thing. There's also the issue of integration. So when it's on-prem in a SQL data warehouse, some sort of data warehouse that speaks SQL, you can connect it to the rest of your infrastructure. So if you go and do spend time in Birst and you augment the data and you create data flows and you do structures and you create this nice set of data structures, you may want to use that data in other applications. So having it on-prem is for that purpose. We also see that there could be contractual, legal things where entities aren't allowed to, for various regulatory reasons, to move things externally, whether or not security was an issue or not. And I think the other thing we've also seen is, this sounds odd, but mergers and acquisitions. When there's divestitures of companies and things like that, they want to be able to take stuff with them and be able to say, I have an asset. It's when you rent a data store in the sky, it's harder to legally identify that as an asset. When you have a physical database that you own, organizations can say, I own that. And so there are legitimate reasons why people would want it on-prem.
Okay. I'm probably going to have to hand back to Eric now, because only, I've gone 5 minutes over the time that I was supposed to. Eric, use any of these questions that I've got outstanding if the audience hasn't got any better ones. Okay, Eric?
Okay, no worries at all. And Brad, I went ahead and made you presenter in case there's some way you can show an answer. I thought that was a pretty good and pretty swift demo. We do have a couple of really good questions from our attendees. So here's the sort of $64,000 pun intended question. One of the attendees writes, slide 13, lower TCO, in other words, total cost of ownership, as little as 1/3 of the cost of typical BI analytic platforms, and he writes 1/3 of what? What is the typical cost? So can you give a ballpark in terms of dollar amount and also how you price things?
Well, that's one of the reasons we use the relative measures, because we've got customers with 5 tables and a megabyte of data, and we've got customers with 500 tables and 5 terabytes of data. So it's hard to say what the size is. Typically, a median customer of ours is, mid 5 figures. And the comparable price that they would have if they did the kind of MicroStrategy Informatica combination or SAP or IBM or one of those sorts of things would be just the license cost of the software alone is going to be, significantly more than what we are, at least 3x, and also the implementation times and teams involved is going to be significantly more than that as well.
Right. Okay, good. And I know that, because I know MicroStrategy pretty well, and one of their stories is that they built all their own stuff, as opposed to the strategy of several other big vendors in the space who, as we mentioned at the top of the hour, acquired various things. And I think anyone in the business knows that when you acquire software, integrating source code is not the easiest or swiftest process in the world. But how much of your stuff is homegrown, and did you use any open source stuff, or where did all the bits and pieces come from?
It's homegrown. We do employ open source because that's one of the ways you get scale. I mean, how does a company our size create all the features and functionality of these guys that have been around for a lot longer? Well, we're using modern methods. We're not encumbered by C++ and some of the ancient architectures that exist in those platforms, and we can leverage hundreds of millions of lines of code in the open source community with the proper licensing arrangements, so that's okay. I would say with MicroStrategy is they may have built their software, but they only have built half of it. There's no data management infrastructure, so typically you find MicroStrategy used in combination with the data management ETL infrastructure. With Birst, we've built both in a single product, and it is homegrown. And that's actually where our patents are as well. Our IP is around a lot of that infrastructure.
Oh, okay. All right, interesting. Let's see, another good question here. So one of the attendees writes that have built trust doing federated searches but ready to move on to BI, however, limited on-premise. It's limited to on-premise due to law enforcement data sensitivity, so they have some real security issues and legal issues, I'm sure. Challenged with limited staff and funding, but having the vision to do all 4 categories that Robyn had outlined. Where would you suggest this attendee start? How do you begin the process of jumping into what you're talking about?
Yeah, the great thing is there's a variety of ways to get involved. I'd say the best thing is to look us up, contact us online at www.birst.com. We also have weekly multiple live demos. I gave a very fast demo, which only scratched the surface. We give much more detailed demos. And the other thing to do, I would suggest, is to talk to, once you do that, contact a Birst person. We do have implementation methodologies for how you can start small and build big. One of the things Robyn said earlier about why BI fails because it doesn't get adopted, one of the big reasons for that is because it was so painful getting that first implementation up that if the first implementation missed the mark with the customers, you never have a chance to iterate on it. An Agile BI framework and an Agile BI methodology is all about getting the first thing up, taking a small bite, getting it up quickly, knowing full well you're going to iterate on it many times a year, so that even if you don't get it 100% right the first time, you'll have enough right that you can build off of and you can continue to aim towards the right solution. So part of what would be important is to connect with somebody here who can walk you through the methodology as well, because that's a big part of it. If you have an Agile methodology, your chances of success are going to go way up.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Okay, here's a really good question, and maybe if you can, if not, no worries, but if you can, you can share your desktop and jump back into the tool. One of the attendees asks a question that I'm going to expand on a bit. The attendee asks, is there the possibility of meta extension to provide a data dictionary or glossary? And I'd like you to get into the whole concept of metadata too, and how you manage metadata within the tool. Can you talk about that real quick?
Sure. So the model that's built here that you're looking at, I think you can hopefully see my desktop right now. Yep. That is what we call this. That's our semantic layer. That is our metadata layer. So each of these concepts is a metadata element that's mapped to some sort of physical element under the covers. We do have the ability to manage subsets of that, manage custom elements in that subject area where you can group and organize and label and set properties and all those. That's my flash thing. Set properties of all of these different elements and create some degree of taxonomy in Birst. Candidly, that's an area where we're going to be building more around things like data lineage, around the ability of self-documenting metadata, those sorts of things. We have some of that now, but it's where we're going as well.
Okay, good. And in terms of like an ontology, for example, I mean, could you actually import an ontology and use that as the basis for building some of these models?
Yes. I mean, fundamentally, our metadata structures, our XML structures, you could use some sort of XSLT transformation to transform an ontology into a base metadata structure. What we need to understand is effectively what is the dimensional model. At the core of Birst is a dimensional model. And once you have that root dimensional model, you can then map it to the core data sources that you have. Generally, you translate it into some sort of schema that we then import. That's generally the way most people do it.
Okay, good. And here's another good comment from an attendee about C++, referencing C++, ancient architecture. Wanted to know what the problems with that and what do you prefer?
The challenge with C++ is just from a programming perspective, it's dramatically less productive. You can get about 3 times the feature productivity out of a Java programmer or a C# programmer than you can out of a C++ programmer, because there's memory management and all that stuff. I mean, memory leaks are killing you. They don't handle failures very well. The exception handling is relatively weak. It's just a productivity framework. There's a slight performance advantage on certain types of architectures, not all of them. But just from a developer productivity perspective, it's low, and the open source community of shared common code is very small. So you end up rewriting most of common stuff yourself. Whereas when you're in one of these higher level languages like Java or C# or something like that, these managed environments, is the code bases that you can work from and participate in are dramatically larger. So the effect of your development team is amplified by many times.
That's interesting. So do you do a fair amount of custom design for your customers, or do your customers actually go in and do some custom to the code itself, or do they just get the tool and then they do what they want with the tool?
They do with the tool. They don't write code. I mean, when I was referring to the coding thing, I was just referring to when we, how do we as a smaller organization compete? Our customers don't write code. I mean, we want to abstract that stuff away. So they should be interacting with visual development environments where they're dragging and dropping and connecting elements at a high level. We want to abstract away even SQL when necessary and scripting when necessary. Although we do have the ability to write lower level functions in Birst so that you can do much more custom things if you need to.
That's interesting. Okay, and just looking at it myself, I can see that certainly power users of some of the more traditional BI tools would just have a field day with this stuff. But for folks who are fairly new, do you guys offer consulting services, or do you, I know you said you do demos on a weekly basis. Do you partner with any consulting firms typically to help with implementations? How does that work?
All of the above. So first of all, I will say I showed you the enterprise version, which has the data mart stuff and all that. We actually have a visualization edition that we launched a couple of weeks ago, which is a significantly simplified model that is meant for a much less technical user. But in addition to that, we also have an interface for building reports, which is also a very business user oriented framework, and then the dashboarding environment is very business user focused. So there are elements of the toolset I didn't get into here. Again, there's just too much to show in a short demo. But to leverage all of the capabilities across the board, we have training, we have education, we have certification. We have a series of partners that are out there that are certified in Birst that can do implementations as well, and we have our own services organization as well, should you desire that. So there's a whole support system here. If you're doing something really simple, you probably don't need much of that. If you're doing something more sophisticated, a couple different applications, and doing a more production environment, then maybe you want to avail yourself of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And so also just a couple more quick questions here. In terms of the database, I mean, you actually have a database with ODBC and JDBC connectors built into this thing. And can you talk more about the database and what kind of database it is?
So per that slide that I had earlier, we actually support multiple databases, and everything from SQL Server to Oracle to we have our own in-memory database, so an in-memory columnar database, and on the high end we have a high-end MPP columnar database that we work with. Fundamentally, what's in common across all of them is they each have different price-performance ratios for different sizes of data. We work with all of them. And they work differently. Different organizations prefer, certainly for the cloud, they shouldn't care. They just have different price performance characteristics. On-prem, they may have different standards that they want to work with. We'll support them. And the issue is across all of them is we speak SQL. So we build things in relational databases, and then those relational databases can be connected to your existing infrastructure.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah, this is very interesting stuff. And then could you show quickly, touch on your dashboards, if you would, real quick, if you can show us something to see, because one of the attendees wants to know where does the synthesis of all this information occur. And one more question I had for you is you talk about a space. Is that part of your collaboration strategy, and what kind of collaborative functionality do you have in here?
So we do have the ability to annotate dashboards and be able to share, basically content discussion streams across different bits of content. So as I'm having, ideas about various things, I can create and post different discussion threads around various bits of content and share them with other folks. A space isn't just a place for people to gather. It's also where the data sits. It's also the measures, the metrics, the KPIs. It's a virtual encapsulation of an entire BI instance. And we can copy it, we can move it, we can have a dev, prod, UAT, we can migrate content from one to the other virtually. So there's a lot of capabilities by not having to have physical instances between them. And once you've got a space, then people can collaborate within it.
That's very interesting. Huh. All right, folks. I think I tried to get to all the questions here. I think we got to all of them. Let me go ahead and get back to the main place here. I'm going to take control back from you. This is very, very interesting stuff. And you guys have been around for 6 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what are some of the key lessons, just as a closing comment here, what are some of the most surprising lessons that you've learned over the last 2 years or so of working with this kind of environment?
The biggest lesson, I think, is that people significantly underestimate the complexities involved in dealing with their own data. And that is the single biggest reason why people succeed or fail or have improper expectations about what they should get out of something like this. These tools are extremely powerful. Birst, you can do a lot of the capability you see in here was designed to handle the fact that the data is messy. But it's surprising to me that even though people have a broad appreciation for data, how relatively little experience there is broadly about how hard it is to make that a repeatable process. And so there's been a lot more education involved in our process than we had expected.
That's very interesting. It's all true, too. That's very interesting stuff. All right, folks, we've burned through 70 minutes, as we do typically here in the briefing room. Thank you so much for all of your excellent questions out there, folks. Really good questions. As always, big thank you to our very own Robyn Bloor, Chief Analyst here at the Bloor Group. We are more than halfway through June. We have one more webcast on intelligence. And, folks, we have sold out now May, June, July, August, and I think September as well. It's going to be a very busy few months. So thank you for all of your time and attention. Thank you for your interest. We will archive this webcast. We archive all of our webcasts at insideanalysis.com. Just look under the webcast tab, and you can find the briefing room there. With that, we will close the event, and thank you so much. Once again, folks, speakers, stick around for one quick minute. We'll do a post-conference, and we'll talk to you next week, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.